The FBI does not revisit ordinary moments without a reason. They do not look backward in time, months before a crime, unless something about that earlier moment refuses to let go. And in the case of Nancy Guthrie, investigators may now be doing exactly that, because somewhere between a quiet family lunch in October and a front door in February, there may be a connection, a line, a moment where everything changed, long before anyone realized it had. The question is not just what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The question is when it truly began. And one of the places investigators have reportedly examined is not a crime scene. It is a restaurant. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived in Tucson, Arizona, in a quiet residential area known as the Catalina Foothills. To the public, she was known primarily as the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a nationally recognized television journalist. But in her own life, Nancy was not a public figure. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman deeply rooted in the city she had called home for decades. She lived the kind of life that rarely intersects with criminal investigation. Until suddenly, it did. On October 17, 2025, Savannah Guthrie returned to Tucson. The visit was part of a television segment, a homecoming piece, a celebration of where she came from, the kind of story morning television is built on: warm, personal, familiar. The filming stretched across the city, from the desert landscapes to cultural landmarks, and eventually to a place that held personal meaning, a restaurant, El Charro Cafe, a historic Tucson institution, a place where Savannah had gone many times before. And on that day, she went there again, this time with a camera crew and with her family. Inside that restaurant, seated at a table, were three people: Savannah Guthrie, her sister Annie, and their mother Nancy. They talked, they laughed, they shared memories. It was filmed for television, a simple human moment. The kind of moment that would normally pass without consequence, but it didn't pass unnoticed, because that moment did not stay inside that restaurant. Weeks later, it aired nationally, and once it aired, it became something else. On November 5, 2025, the segment was broadcast. What had been a private family interaction became public, widely visible, accessible to millions. Nancy Guthrie appeared on screen. Her face, her voice, her connection to Savannah, her presence in Tucson, her familiarity with that restaurant. In just a few minutes of television, a quiet life became visible in detail. And in most cases, that would mean nothing. But investigators are now asking a different question. What if it meant something to the wrong person? Because what happened next does not look random. It looks like something else, something slower, more deliberate, more calculated. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie returned home. She had been out earlier that evening. By around 9:50 p.m., she was back inside. Her garage closed, the house settled. Nothing appeared unusual. For a few hours, everything was normal. And then sometime after midnight, something changed. In the early hours of February 1st, technology began to record fragments of what was happening. A doorbell camera, a motion detection alert, a system disconnect. Individually, these signals might not mean much, but together, they form a pattern. At approximately 2:12 a.m., a person was detected. Shortly after that, the system stopped transmitting. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker device lost connection. That is where the timeline fractures, because from that moment forward, Nancy Guthrie is no longer accounted for. Later, investigators released footage, a figure at the front door, masked, covered, prepared. This was not someone improvising. This was someone who came with purpose. And that changes everything, because once you remove randomness, you are left with intention. From the beginning, investigators have treated this case as targeted, not a chance encounter, not a wrong house, not a spontaneous act. Targeted. And that word carries weight. Because targeted does not always mean personal. It does not always mean the suspect knew the victim. Sometimes it means something else entirely. It means studied. Weeks after Nancy disappeared, investigators began focusing on earlier dates. January 11th, January 24th. They went back. They asked questions. They requested surveillance. That tells us something critical, because when investigators look weeks before a crime, they are not looking for coincidence. They are looking for preparation. Someone may have been in that neighborhood. Not once, but more than once. That is not how impulsive crimes behave. That is how planned actions begin. With presence, with observation, with repetition. And this is where the timeline begins to stretch. Because if someone was watching Nancy's home in January, then the decision to target her did not happen that night. It happened earlier. Which raises a more unsettling question. How much earlier? This is where the restaurant returns to the story. Because one line of reporting suggested that investigators asked questions connected to that October filming. Questions about behavior, about people watching, about someone who may have stood out. But there is a complication. The restaurant's management has publicly said they were never contacted. Those two things cannot both be fully true. And that contradiction matters, because it tells us something about the investigation itself. It is still moving, still forming, still incomplete. But here is what matters more than the contradiction, the direction. Because investigators do not arrive at October by accident. They arrive there by working backward, from February to January to November to October. And when they reach that point, they are no longer asking what happened, they are asking where it started. Because the possibility they are examining is simple and disturbing. What if someone saw Nancy Guthrie during that filming? What if they noticed her, focused on her, followed her, not physically, but mentally, not immediately, but over time? That is how modern targeting can begin, not with proximity, but with visibility, not with relationship, but with exposure. A single televised moment can provide information, a face, a connection, a location, a pattern, and in the wrong context, that information can become a starting point. That does not mean it happened here, but it explains why investigators might consider it. Because when a case shows signs of planning, you have to look for the first moment of awareness, the first time the victim became visible to the suspect. And if that moment exists, it may not look important at the time. It may look ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable, like a family lunch. At that table, Nancy was not alone. Her daughter was there. Her other daughter was there. A family structure was visible. Relationships were visible. Dynamics were visible. To most people, that is just a family moment. But to someone studying, it is information. Who matters to whom? Who is connected? Who is central? Who is accessible? And that is what makes this theory so difficult. Because it does not require personal knowledge. It only requires attention. As of now, no suspect has been publicly identified. No arrest has been made. No definitive connection has been confirmed between the restaurant and the crime. And that matters, because responsible reporting does not turn possibility into certainty. But the pattern that investigators appear to be exploring is real. A pattern that moves backward. A pattern that connects time. A pattern that asks a question no one can yet answer. If someone targeted Nancy Guthrie, when did they first decide to do it? Was it in January, while watching her home? Or did that come later? Was it in November, after seeing her on television? Or did that only confirm something already forming? Or was it earlier still? In October, inside a restaurant, when a camera crew was filming and someone in the room was paying attention for all the wrong reasons. That is the question investigators are chasing. Not just who, but when. Because if they can find that moment, the moment awareness turned into intent, then they are closer to understanding everything that followed. For the Guthrie family, this theory carries a weight it was never meant to carry, because it reframes something deeply personal, a return home, a shared meal, a moment of connection. If this theory holds, then that moment was seen by someone it was never meant for. And that is what makes this case so unsettling, because it suggests that the beginning of the story did not look like a beginning at all. It looked like something ordinary, a table, a conversation, a camera, and somewhere in the background, attention. The investigation continues. Evidence is still being analyzed. Timelines are still being refined. And somewhere within all of that, there is an answer. But until that answer is found, the most important question remains the same. Was someone watching Nancy Guthrie that day? Because if they were, then everything we think we know about where this case began may have to be rewritten. And the search is not just for who took her, it is for the moment they decided to.